It was supposed to be a fun-filled road trip, but one wrong turn steered this family of four into survival story number 8, a deadly odyssey in the Oregon wilderness.
It started out very innocently and got very dangerous very quickly.
On November 25th, 2006, internet personality James Kim and his wife Katie piled their 2 young daughters into the family station wagon. They were headed home to San Francisco after spending Thanksgiving weekend in the Pacific Northwest.
They planned to break up the trip, and Katie Kim had made a reservation at a little hotel on the Oregon coast, so they were heading there to spend the night.
The couple was unfamiliar with the area and relied on road maps to plan their trip.
They were supposed to take Highway 42, which is a direct shot straight to the coast, and they missed it somehow. And then saw Bear Camp Road through the mountains. It looked on their map like it was a direct shot to the coast as well.
And they decided to continue on this alternative route.
It wasn't clear on the map that the route that they were going to take was as treacherous as it actually was. When it's snowing, it's downright dangerous.
Fearing they were lost, the Kims tried to call for assistance but were unable to get a cell phone signal. But the Kims continued driving deeper into the mountains. Then, at a fork in the road, the couple made a tragic mistake. They drove through an open gateway that should have been locked and onto a rough, unpaved road.
They figured it was a road that led somewhere.
And they kept going forward thinking, oh, we're going to hit the right road.
It was 20 miles or so before they decided to stop and wait it out. Then that night, a real blizzard hit, and then they were snowed in.
Their situation got desperate pretty quick.
They didn't know how far out in the wilderness they were, and so they waited for help, but nobody came along.
Night turned to day, then back to night again, with no sign of help. Hiking out in the sub-freezing temperatures was not a viable option.
They had 2 little children in the car with them, a 4-year-old and a 7-month-old baby. So they had to think of the survival of their daughters.
Katie rationed the small amount of food they had in the car, and James found berries to eat. They melted snow for drinking water and played games to pass the hours. In the meantime, a rescue team was dispatched after a coworker reported James missing. After 3 days trapped in the snow, the Kims didn't give up.
They got a mirror and tried to signal airplanes. They built fire, started burning their car tires as a signal fire and also to keep warm.
The ground effort to rescue them was not well coordinated. Pilots flew the same route several times over. There was just a whole bunch of series of mistakes that really led to that situation lasting as long as it did.
On the 6th day of their ordeal, James made a final desperate attempt to save his family. Outfitted only in light clothing and sneakers, James trudged through the snow, hoping to reach a nearby town.
They had argued a bit, and James Kim at this point, I think, decided he was going to do something to get them out of this situation.
He thought that the closest town was only 4 miles away.
Unfortunately, it was more like 15 miles or more.
He promised his wife that he was going to come back, but that never happened.
The following day, Katie tried to carry her 2 girls back to the main road, but she was too weak.
They went back to the car and they were spotted by a helicopter.
Rescuers airlifted Katie and the girls to safety.
She clearly made the decision, and smartly so, to go back to the vehicle. And that may be what saved all of their lives.
James, however, was still missing.
The searchers continued looking for James for 2 days, and eventually they came across some of his clothes. And then they found his body in a small creek 16 miles away from the car.
During his attempt to save his family, Kim died from exposure and hypothermia.
It was just a devastating time when his body was discovered. The Chronicle got hundreds and hundreds of emails from people who were just beside themselves with grief.
In her husband's memory, Katie began the James Kim Technology Foundation, which brings technological resources to school children in the San Francisco Bay Area.
One thing that we point out to people in this situation, stay with your vehicle. A car is a lot bigger and stands out a lot more than you or I on foot.
He was once named one of People magazine's sexiest men alive. But in December 2004, this Oprah protege was lucky just to be alive. At number 7 on our list is tsunami survivor Nate Berkus.
Nate Berkus, so cute. The man you call if you need a paint color or advice about anything to do with style.
It was the day after Christmas 2004. 33-year-old Berkus and his partner, 39-year-old photographer Fernando Bengochea, were enjoying the holidays at a beachside resort on the Southeast Asian island of Sri Lanka.
Nate and Fernando were staying in this cabana that was only about 50 feet from the shoreline. They were just hanging out for a romantic time together.
But that morning, nearly 1,000 miles away, a magnitude 9.3 earthquake struck.
The epicenter was off of northern Sumatra.
The second biggest earthquake since we've been counting. They created a gash in the seabed about the length of the coast of California.
I was in Los Angeles when the Northridge quake happened. It lasted for 30 seconds. My neighborhood was destroyed. We literally had to move out of our house. This quake was 300 times more powerful and lasted for 10 minutes.
The enormous underwater quake created a powerful tsunami that swept outward in all directions.
Once those shock waves find a coastline and it begins to rise up, all of that energy is amassed. It's pushed up that coastal plate and it comes out in the form of a wave. You get these gigantic surges. Might be 10 feet high, might be 100 feet high.
Within hours, the tsunami ripped through the picturesque coastlines of Thailand, Malaysia, India, and Sri Lanka, where Nate was vacationing.
When the tsunami hit, there was all of these tourists and locals in the coastal areas, and what they described was this sort of rapid drop in sea level, almost like a really unusually very low tide. And then the next thing, they saw this massive wave approaching.
Without warning, the towering wall of water crashed onto the shore. The giant waves demolished everything in their path, including the small hut where Nate and Fernando were staying.
You can try to imagine what it's like when the entire ocean spills onto you and starts just ragdolling you through a town, essentially. It would have to be one of the most powerless situations in the world.
They were lucky enough to grab onto a telephone pole and keep their heads above water as they rode back on the surge.
Then another wave hit. The rushing water knocked Nate and Fernando from their perch. Fernando was washed away into the jumble of floating debris.
You want to try to get onto the largest piece of debris that you possibly can. Whatever you can hang on to, whatever you can climb onto, you're going to have a much better chance of surviving.
At the time of the tsunami, model Petra Nemkova was also in Southeast Asia. She was vacationing in Thailand with her boyfriend, photographer Simon Attlee, when the epic disaster struck. Nemkova survived. Sadly, Attlee did not. Meanwhile, Nate suffered only minor injuries. Berkus and 50 other survivors ended up stranded on a hillside. For 2 days, they went without food or water. Help eventually arrived for Nate, but his rescue was bittersweet. His partner, Fernando, was missing. Fernando's body was never found. More than 200,000 people lost their lives in the Asian tsunami, one of the worst natural disasters in human history.
If the ground shakes for 15 seconds, or the ocean recedes, so it starts to suddenly get shallow, and you see fish flopping around on the sand, this is a sign that you need to get to high ground very quickly, and that you have, 5 or 10 minutes to do so.
When we returned, a beautiful woman ambushed by a deadly predator.
My air supply was cut off, and I knew that this is it.